Welcome, everyone. This is Mike Gibbs, and we're here for the fourth and final day of the Enterprise Architecture Fundamentals Bootcamp. We've had lots of fun for the first 3 days. We've talked all about what we do as enterprise architects. We talked a lot about various components of enterprise architecture. And today we have more fun enterprise architecture. We're going to talk about enterprise architecture road mapping and transformation planning, which is a lot of what we do as architects. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun. After that, we're going to talk about enterprise architecture governance. And we're going to spend some time here talking about functional governance and how do you create a real enterprise architecture governance strategy that's going to work and actually speed things up and be effective as opposed to block everything and slow things down. So we're going to talk about how to do it right. And then after that, we're going to talk about executive storytelling and enterprise architecture communication, because at the end of the day, you can design the perfect architecture, but if nobody funds it, nothing happens. And while we can't go through the full spectrum and scope of executive storytelling the kind of way we do in our full enterprise architecture development program, we can give you some quick tips and pointers and kind of guide you along the way. So we'll talk about executive storytelling and what executives care about at the CEO level, COO, CFO, for example. We'll talk about what various business leaders are concerned about. And then we'll really talk about, some of the business components that go into enterprise architecture. So it should be a really fun day. Now, I like knowing that you're there. So in the chat box, let me know where you're from. Maybe give me a hashtag enterprise architecture. And then I'm going to tell you about three really cool things going on. Tonight, we're going to have my friend Praveen. Praveen was once our client, and now he's a senior vice president at JP Morgan Chase. He's an AI architect, and he's extraordinary. And tonight, he's going to be coming, and we're going to be talking. I'm going to be asking him what he does in his job as an AI architect. He's been on the bleeding edge of data for a couple of decades now, so we can talk to him about big data. We'll talk about what he does and lessons he's learned. And any question you really want to ask Praveen or me, you can ask on this free session, and that's going to occur tonight at 6 p.m. So hope to see you there. We'll look really forward to meeting you. I also want to tell you that there's two other things we can do to help you in your architecture career. Tomorrow, we have a How to Become a Security Architect webinar. And in that webinar, we'll talk about what we do as security architects, the skills you need as a security architect, what hiring managers want in security architects, what your architect portfolio should look like, how you stand out from the crowd and get hired, regardless of your background. So that webinar will be free. If you want to learn about enterprise architecture or others in that same webinar, we'll answer that. So I run this webinar twice per week. We have one tomorrow. I hope you can join us. The link is in the description below, and my team is dropping it into the chat box. And at the conclusion of this, several days after this boot camp, we're going to be releasing a book on enterprise architecture to go along with this program. So you can watch the program again. You'll have a workbook on enterprise architecture. It'll have all the things we've covered, diagrams to help you through the way and help build your enterprise architecture fundamentals. So my team's going to drop the link for that in the chat box. And I hope you sign up for it, and we'll send it out in a few days. Hunt Vary Mellerin. Haven't been there in a little while, but I've spent some time there. Enterprise architect. I love that, Klaus. Adrian, so good to see you. Enterprise architect. I love that. And Paredes 72. Good to see you. VJ Reddy, well, good to see you. Enterprise architecture. I love that. So I know you're here. I know you're awake. You're oriented. So I'll have, we'll start rolling the content, and I'll see you back in about 25 minutes or so, or something like that for any questions you may have. Now we're going to discuss road mapping and transformation planning in enterprise architecture. And I'm going to set a boundary right now. This is not going to be a Gantt chart with a fake precision session. This is going to be about real-world road mapping for enterprise architects. And if you can consider a roadmap as a story, not a schedule, you're going in the right direction. So here's the simplest definition I like to use to describe a roadmap. It's going to be a story that will change over time. It is not a project plan. See, a project plan is about the exact dates and tasks that need to occur. A roadmap, by comparison, is about the direction, the strategic direction of the organization, and the sequence of events that are necessary to get that to occur. So, as enterprise architects, it's all about alignment of the technology, the people, the processes, according to the organization strategy, and evaluating all the trade-offs, because there's no perfect solution. And if we think about creating a roadmap, we have to think about a few things. At the enterprise level, what I really want you to think about is business priorities, whatever the product commitments are, like we will have a product at this date at this time, for example, and the technology reality that we're dealing with. So if you look at a good roadmap, it'll say, here's where we're going, here's why we're going there, and approximately this is the rough order that we need to do to get there. So realistically speaking, whenever I come up with a roadmap, I like to set expectations. To me, it's a living document and it's clarity, but we can't pretend certainty with the unknown or the future. So that roadmap is going to be a living document. It's going to be the changes. It's going to change as we learn new things. So a good roadmap will give you clarity without predicting certainty, because no one can exactly plan the future. A bad roadmap gives certainty, and that roadmap will collapse upon contact with reality. So I'm curious, those of you out there, and let me know in the comments section of this platform, how many of you have seen a roadmap for your company, and it's a set in stone roadmap with firm dates, and then 3 months later it's gone and there's something else. That's not exactly how we do roadmaps, and that's the whole point. So let's talk about how we structure a roadmap will work in most organizations. So the first thing that I like to look at is the horizon model. And when we think of building a roadmap, we have to think about now, what we do next, and what we do long term. You typically call that the horizon model. So, and this is going to work fairly in most places because it's simple, it's honest. So here's the way I look at time horizons. Now, 0 to 3 months approximately. Next, which is what we do between, say, 3 and 9 months. And later, which is 9 months to 18 months plus, and it can go out many, many years. And obviously, all organizations are different in the way they budget and the way their business is built. So you're going to have to adjust those time frames. But the now, next, and later is something that typically works for me. Because obviously, some companies run faster, some run slower, but this is about a good way you can look at it. So what kind of things belong in that now category? Well, let's talk about the now category. So if I have a now category, what am I going to put in the now category? Well, there's going to be certain things that belong in now. So let's say I've got some critical fixes. That has to occur now or to stabilize something. Maybe we have some foundation work that will unblock delivery of things later. For example, maybe we need to tune the network to be able to do things or add additional services later. And we're typically doing in the short term, low ambiguity, low risk things that we already know well. So low ambiguity. And that's the kind of things we can do now. Because if you think about it, it's emergent stuff. It's stuff to enable other things, and it's things that we know that we do all the time that are pretty easy. And that's why we can do it now, and now means, typically speaking, 0 to 3 months. Now, what's going to belong in that next category? Well, if now is right now in the next 3 months, and next is somewhere in the 3 to 9 months, depending upon your organization, this is where high priority things are going to start coming into play. So what's going to belong in that next? So let's go back to that model that we drew and let's start talking about next. So when we start thinking next, we've got another set of things that are obviously fairly important to us. And let's kind of draw some of these next things out. Well, where we're going. So let's say the approach is coming clear. We know exactly how we're going to get there. It's pretty clear for us to do something. We want to move something. But we know what the dependencies are, and they're very limited. So by dependencies, if this thing that we want to do is dependent upon 20 different things, we have to make sure that doing this one thing doesn't mess up those 20 things, for example. So we start having to make sure that the dependencies are clear. And that can take a fair amount of time to figure them out. And this is often dependent upon, this now phase being completed before we can go to the next phase. Okay, so that's relatively short-term stuff. 0 to 3 months, 3 months to 9 months. Now let's talk about where enterprise architecture really earns its keep, what makes us special. It's because we're going to reduce ambiguity. We're going to make things clear. So the next phase, that next 3 to 9 months, doesn't become chaos. Now, those of us that are working as enterprise architects are also focused on strategic direction. And that's where, to me, the fun part comes. And that belongs in the later phases. What are we going to do after the now, next, and later phase? So this is where a lot of the fun transformation is really going to occur, and a lot of the big work, because big things take, fair periods of time to truly figure out. So if this is the later category, let's talk about major transformations. You're really going to change the way that business does something. We're going to retire this platform. We're going to modernize capability, whatever. These are big things for us. Sorry about that. And at this point, when we're talking about later, it's more about signaling direction. Because there are many things that may change in the next 5 to 10 years or 18 months plus or whatever it is. But this is big thing. This is high level intent. But not implementation level detail, because now is tactical. Right now, let's go fix it. Next is, 3 to 9 months, and later is 9 months to 18 months plus. So this could be years in some organizations. So hopefully that'll kind of give you a bigger picture for what we're trying to deal with or working around here. So if the later, that last category, that strategic guide, major transformation, signal direction, if that starts looking like a detailed plan, you're not doing enterprise architecture. You're making up stuff because it's all based on things that are so far out, it's going to be hard to actually predict. So what I want you to understand when we actually do our job as enterprise architects and make that enterprise work better, it's not just the tech. So many people have come to me and say, Mike, I've transformed an organization. I've taken their information from the private data center to the cloud. And I said, what did you change about their business? And they said, none. I said, so I have an experiment for you. I want you to move your clothes from one closet in your house to another closet in your house and tell me if your life was transformed. And they said, Mike, that's not going to do anything. I said, neither is just taking your tech from the data center to the cloud, unless you change the way that organization operates and you change the direction, you add new capabilities or what have you. So that's what we're going to be really talking about. Change is not just the tech. If all your change is the tech, it'll be one of the 70 to 80% of architectures that fail to provide any real value, because tech is just a tool. It's what we can use that tool for. So when we start thinking about what we're really dealing with, it's not just tech. And that's the key. We have to deal with a lot of things. So, obviously we're addressing a business, right? So if you think about what we're working on the business and its capabilities. And we have to optimize this, otherwise it makes no sense. Now we also have to think about the applications and platforms we use. And the reason is those applications are how are often run our business logic. And platforms. And that could be, lots of different things, data centers, clouds, what have you. Which applications support what business thing. And then we typically have to think about some form of data, and hopefully we're doing some kind of analytics. And that's another component we typically work on. And then we typically have to think about the technology. Now, what could this technology be? It could be a data center. It could be a cloud. It could be security. It could be robotics. It could be or machines that help that business do its job better. And also, we can change all of this if we don't have any degree of change management, and it all fails. So these are really the places where we're tuning. So that's what I want you to think of. It's not just the tech. And if your roadmap only has tech lanes, you're not running an architecture practice. You're not running any kind of transformation. You're just running a migration, taking things from one closet to another closet. I'm curious. Let me know in the comments section or the chat box. How many of you have been part of a transformation that didn't do anything other than move the tech? Probably a lot of you. So that's what we're trying to talk about here. All right. So if now is what we do now, and next is the next 3 to 9 months, and later is, 9 months to 18 months plus, let's start talking about building the transformation. Where do we go? So we have to start thinking about a starting point. So our transformation is going to take a lot of things. We're typically going to look at a few things. So here's the question that I use whenever we're going to be doing a digital transformation initiative. So when I see a client, I ask them, what capabilities need to be stronger? Or new capabilities do you need as a business? Why? If I don't know what the business needs, I have no idea what I'm designing for. And that's not going to work. Now, the next question I typically ask is which value streams are broken or too slow? Meaning, which part in the way that organization makes money is suboptimal? Because that's a target to fix. I like to ask, where is the cost or risk too high? So we know what we're working with or what risk is unacceptable for the organization. Now, that gives us some insights. But somewhere along the line, we've got to turn those insights into an initiative. So that's where we're going from what we need to do to create a plan. So let's say a company came to us and said, we want to modernize our order management platform, or we want to centralize data for a 360-degree view in a single pane of glass, or we want to automate onboarding of new employees, or reduce integration technologies that we have from 8 of them to 3 standard ones. These aren't tasks. They're outcomes or capability moves that we're working for. So what I like to do is group our initiatives into, say, themes. And if we know what the initiatives are and we translate them into themes, we have a way to actually present them to the executives that are going to matter. So what are kind of common themes that we might work with inside of these environments? We could be focused on customer experience, for example, improving the customer experience. We could be focused on operational excellence, so we do a better job at what we do. We could be focused on enhancing our data and then future AI systems to enhance productivity, change the customer experience, increase revenue, make better predictions, what have you. Or we could be dealing with something that's a risk or a compliance issue. Or typically there's some flavor of a platform modernization. Now that gives us a narrative to start. And as we use that narrative to create that alignment, because the alignment will create funding. Okay, you want to work on customer experience? We know what the cost of poor customer experience is, the cost of doing nothing. Now we know what we're dealing with to create a business case later. So you kind of want to connect the backlog to the portfolio and resources, and I'll tell you what I mean. So if we look at what's needed, that backlog is going to create the roadmap. It's going to determine what portfolios we actually plan, for example. And it's going to determine where the resources go. So if this thing is super important, we fund it first. So we always have to sequence. And the sequencing is where our transformations, roadmaps usually succeed or fail. So we'll work through some of the things that are associated with sequencing. So there are a couple of things that you really need to balance in every architecture. And realistically, there are 3 forces are what are your dependencies, risk reduction, and some flavor of value delivery. So let's talk a little bit about what the dependencies are. There are going to be a lot of dependencies that are necessary to make things work. And if we get these dependencies wrong or we miss them, all kinds of chaos can ensue. So let's draw out some dependencies and we'll play with it so I can show you what I mean. So the first kind of dependencies are going to be technical dependencies that we'll discuss. And what could that be, for example? Well, let's say you want to do AI. You can't modernize the AI if you don't have good data. Or maybe in a technical dependency, for example, you want to create a zero trust architecture for your enterprise, but you have to get your identity systems upgraded first. So those are the kind of technical dependencies we could be talking about. You want to deploy voice or video? You may need to upgrade that network, add QoS, what have you, to make sure the network performance is going to be there. Now, let's talk about operational dependencies, because they're pretty serious too. What do I mean by operational dependencies? So, in order to make it work, we need to train our employees on a new way to do business. We may need new teams. We may need to change the operating model for our business. We may need to add new levels of customer service or support, change our run books, for example. We may need to change ownership or the ownership model of something. Who's going to own what platform? So you can see the technical dependencies, we've got to get that right, because if we miss a technical dependency, it's going to fail. If we miss an operational dependency of what's necessary to make it work in operations, it's still going to fail. Now, there are still other dependencies we need to map out. What about vendor or legal dependencies? So let's go add them too, and we'll talk about what goes into that. And this could also be legal too. I'm going to call it vendor/legal. So what do we mean by this? Well, we may need to get some contracts changed before we can do what we do, because the contract prevents us from doing it. We may need lead times to actually get what we need to make it happen. What if it takes us 9 months to get all the GPUs we need? What we might want to do might need to go through some regulatory process. A new medical thing has to get, say, an FDA 510K to be used. And all of this are things that we have to look at. So in the end of the day, with any architecture, I want you to really make sure you've mapped out those technical dependencies, those operational dependencies, and those vendor and legal dependencies. Because I promise you, if you haven't, it's not going to work. Bad things are going to happen. So let's talk about risk reduction, which is something that we really want to do. That's the second force that we're talking about. So what we want to do is we want to take high risk things or high uncertainty things and not just immediately commit to them, but learn a lot early so we really know what we're doing. And that, for the high risk issues that we're dealing with, it gives us a lot of time to maybe plan around proof of concept tests, or do a pilot with a small scale or a slice of the business so we can see how it's going to work with real traffic and real use. So this makes it a lot easier to contend with. And we're going to use a lot of early phases to de-risk, say, an architectural choice, especially if it's high risk, to test standards and reference architectures on a small environment, to really validate performance or security or operational expectations. Because if the first time you test your new architecture isn't reality in production, that's gambling. That's not good architecture. So we talked about forces, and let's talk about that other force, the driving forces, and that's value delivery. We have to avoid the classic transformation. It's all pain now, but we're going to get something later for it. It's not going to work. The roadmap will die politically anyway. So what we want to typically do is front load in any architecture some kind of win. Ideally a quick win so we can show the business, yes, this architecture made a change. If we're designing an architecture, there needs to be visible business improvements. If not, we didn't do a good job, so we need to do that as well. And we need to make sure that our architecture provides capabilities that reduce friction for teams and makes it easier for people to do their jobs. And at the same time, we've got to align that architecture to reality. The organization's fiscal cycles, for example, when they're going to launch products, any kind of regulatory goals. So there's a lot that's going to go into this. And see, if the roadmap that we're talking about ignores the business calendar, It's an internal tech wish list, not a roadmap for the business. See, it always comes back to the business. So we're always in a process of balancing. And balancing. And here's the rule. If you optimize only for dependencies, guess what? You're going to be slow. If you optimize only for value, you'll probably be risky. And if you optimize only for risk, well, you'll de-risk your environment, but you'll never have anything and you'll have no business coming in either. So that's when we talk about trade-offs. Enterprise architecture is all about trade-offs. We have to optimize all elements of the business, and in many cases, they're competing interests with each other. So we'll talk about some roadmap anti-patterns, things that I don't want you to do under any circumstances. Acting like later is certain. I can predict the future. I have a crystal ball. Don't go there. No executive's going to trust you. Putting everything in the now category. Oh, we have to do it right now. Well, anything strategic has to be planned. Ignoring change management and thinking you can just make the changes and it's going to be fine and you didn't deal with the operations. That's going to be a disaster as well. Creating a sequence that produces no business value for 12 months, that's not a great thing to be doing either. Or running any kind of major tech initiatives where the people aren't involved, the processes aren't involved. These are anti-patterns I want you to avoid. So, how do we measure outcomes? How do we report those outcomes to executives in a manner that will be interesting to them, that they will fund, that's CXO relevant, if you will? Because the executives have no caring about the diagrams you made. They don't care how many architecture reviews you processed. That's what executives care about. Speed. Time to market and cycle. So did your architecture get something better to the market faster than the competition or make it faster? Did your new architecture enhance the stability of the system, reduce incidents, make it faster to repair things when they did? Did your architecture change the economics in some way? Did your systems make it cheaper to produce a product per unit, for example? Or reduce the platform's cost that you're using? Did it change customer experience, like customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction? These things are metrics that executives care about. They don't care about packets per second. They don't care about anything that's not related to the business because that's their job, is to grow the business. So let's define a few metrics that you might be able to use for the various themes we're talking about. And you'll typically be able to measure these in 12 to 18 months from now. So let's talk about some examples from the customer experience side. If we reduce new onboarding from new employees to 14 days to 2 days, that is going to make it easier for the business. They'll be able to onboard people for less money and be more productive. If we can shift 20% of our customers to self-service, we reduce the need for staff, enabling our staff to be refocused on things that have higher value for the business. So again, customer experience is a great theme that executives will care about. Platform theme. We've reduced our integration technologies from 8 to 3. Well, that's a big thing because now we don't need a huge team of people that are focused on integrations. We've got less of them. We're now standardized. We move faster, and we probably have less security risks along the way. Or we cut the average environment time from a week to hours. That means speed. It means agility for the business, and everybody loves that. Now, risk and compliance is another theme that every executive cares about. We reduced any kind of high severity audit findings, for example. Or we increased the number of systems that are meeting the baseline security controls that we've planned upon. And if you can't define what's better, you're not transforming anything, because in order to transform something, in order to create competitive advantage, you need to know what you want to fix. And we don't want to just move, we want to move and transform at the same time. So generally speaking, some visuals may help you communicate things. You might create, say, a heat map where you've got areas of red and amber and green on initiatives or capabilities. You might use some kind of trend line that shows metrics over time. You may show the executive simple milestone markers like baselines established or PI and complete or scale phase or legacy application retired. But that's realistically what we're talking about. So here's the quick executive narrative I want to give you. In last quarter, we completed X, we learned Y, we adjusted Z on the roadmap. And that way we can be very transparent about the changes, and we can show how roadmap changes enhanced in some way learning, it reduced failures. Because the roadmap doesn't change, it doesn't adapt, you're not learning, and you're obviously not being honest about it because the world changes. So think of a roadmap as a simple story that changes over time. It's not a Gantt chart with fake precision. It is make it a multi-lane business, data, tech, and change management. Build the transformation backlog from strategy and capability maps, and sequence things by balancing dependencies, risk reduction, and value delivery. And obviously report your progress and all the good all the outcomes actually, but report the outcomes as well as a clear narrative of what's completed or not to the executives so they know what's going on. Let's check in and see if anyone has any questions. I know questions can arise when we start talking about some of these concepts. So if you do have any, drop them in the chat box and then we'll answer them. If you're having a good time, maybe give the video a like. If you're learning something, maybe subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified of new videos to help you in your architect career. And everyone that's here, I encourage you to join us tonight. My good friend Praveen's going to come in. He's a senior vice president of architecture at JP Morgan Chase. He's an AI architect. He'll be here. You can ask him all kinds of questions about what he does, the architect career, and anything about it. So, because I like you to hear from all kinds of world-class architects whenever we can help you do that. So he'll be on tonight. So I hope you join us at 6 p.m. tonight. My team's going to drop the link to that. And if you're joining us late, you can still see my good friend Praveen talk about architecture tonight as well. As a reminder that we have an architecture webinar tomorrow. Tomorrow's is going to be on security architecture. We rotate them every week. Cloud architecture, AI architecture, security architecture, enterprise architecture. You can register for any of these webinars in the description and the chat box. Tomorrow's is going to be on security architecture. Hope to see you there. Like I said, on these, we'll talk about the architecture careers in general and the skills that you need and what hiring managers are looking for and what belongs in your portfolio and, what kind of credentials to build. And you can ask us any questions. It's on Zoom, all free. So hope to see you there. So there is that. And then in case you just joined us, letting everyone know that there is a book that we have written on enterprise architecture. It'll be released in a few days. It's going to cover every one of these concepts in this course. Got lots of illustrations to help make it easier for you, a lot of content, and sign up for it. It'll be emailed to you soon. Now, since no one asked me questions, I always get nervous to see if you're awake. So let me know if you're awake with a hashtag enterprise architecture, because it just feels awfully quiet out there. I see there's people in that audience. I see there's a good number of you, but it seems awfully quiet out there. So hope you're awake. Hi, Andy. It's good to see you. Wow. So Shai, I'll give it a couple more seconds to see if anything else comes in. Good to see you, Enterprise, Adrian. Thank you for showing me you're awake. Good to see you, Prady72, to know that you're awake. Jasser, always good to see you. Klaus, great to see you. Jason, wonderful. Okay, I see Lassiter. All right, you're all out there and you're all awake. Wonderful. Because, my plan is after we do some of our training is we're going to run a lab and I'm going to ask you an engineering thing and maybe you'll tell me the architect thing to make sure that you got it, you're growing as architects, because I want you all to grow in your architecture careers. It's the best thing I've ever done. This and internal medicine is the only two things I really know. So love architecture, love healthcare. Igor, it is always good to see you and great to see that you're here and awake as well. All right, now I know that everybody is awake. This is absolutely terrific. Let's see what the trade-off question is. It just came in. When you do trade-off, do you need to look at cost? Absolutely. So there's a difference between cost and value, but I'll definitely talk about that. And I want to make that very clear. If you buy something for $10 and it does nothing for you, it's extraordinarily expensive. If you buy something for $1,000 and you get $10,000 back, it's incredibly cheap. So when we evaluate trade-offs, we may end up with a more expensive product if it delivers more business value. It might be worth it. It might be worth investing, $3 billion in an AI recommendation engine for an e-commerce provider if it generates $5 billion in additional sales. So, yes, cost is always there, but it could be performance versus cost. It could be security versus usability, but we have to look at it all because at the end of the day, cost is a factor. Supportability is also a factor. Usability is a factor. Trusting the vendors involved is a factor. Making sure you have the people that can actually manage it is a factor. Making sure it gets you to your next business goal is also a factor. And when you average it out, each one of those trade offs has their own thing, and cost is just one of them. Great, great, great question. Great question, Andy. When people approach enterprise architecture to replace a technology as it's expensive, how do you relate it to the business? Because the ask is technical. Well, it really isn't, even though it's going to sound technical. So let's say someone wants to change. Let's say they want to replace a database, for example. Now, if the person walks into the executive's office and says, the database is old, so we need to replace it, I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. There will be no funding. Now, if the person walks into the same executive and says, the current data platform creates operational risk, it's limiting reporting accuracy, and it's slowing business decision making, and that's costing us X, now all of a sudden it's business relevant. Someone walks in and says, we should move everything to AWS or everything to Azure or everything to Google, just like randomly like that. That's not going to get an architect believed, trusted, or funded. But if that architect was to say, for example, we need a cloud strategy that will balance cost, security, resilience, vendor risk, and compliance, and at the same time be more agile to business growth. Now we're starting to talk about things the businesses do care about. Somebody wants to say we need a better CI/CD pipeline. The executive says, but that's CI/CD pipeline. But if they're brought with something that says, we need to reduce release friction, improve quality, and shorten the timeline between business demands and actual software availability, now that the business funds. So that's really the secret, Andy, is to take whatever these technical things are and translate them into business problems, because business problems get funded and technology things are only excited to other techies. I love tech because in my youth, I'm a techie and I'm still a hidden techie. But at the end of the day, I'm also an executive and I fund initiatives that actually create value. Great, great, great question. Love these questions that are coming in. Hi, Mike. What comes first? To be at texture or as an architecture? I don't know that I actually understand what that question is. I would love to answer it.
They're asking what comes first, the to-be architecture or the as-is architecture?
Okay. So the as-is architecture is what we found. The to-be architecture is what we're creating. So realistically speaking, when we get to a client, what we're going to figure out is everything where they're at today. So what's their current business architecture look like? The current org chart, the key way the organization operates. Then we're going to look at their current data platform, their current application platform, their technology platform, whether that be their networks, their data centers, their cloud stuff, their AI, their robotics. And we're going to map that all out so we know what our starting point is. And then we're going to compare that to the future business goals we have, the changes in the way the business architecture will need to be, or how that business operates in the future. And then at that point, we will look at the new data, applications, technology, AI architecture and say, will it get that business to its new goals without new strategies? And what we'll do is we'll compare those goals, those things, to what we have. And realistically speaking, we want to do new things. Our current tech probably won't get us there. So we need to build the gap analysis between what we have and what we want to go to. And then we build a plan to get there. And that's the migration plan, which is ultimately our architecture plan. So realistically speaking, you should start with where we want to go from the executive perspective. But before you can make any changes, you have to look at the current as-is architectures of the business, architecture, data, application, technology. And then we'll create the new ones based upon the business goals. And then map the difference from where we're at to where we're going to go. Great, great, great question. Can I please touch on the current hacks? And thank you for your knowledge. So I don't know what you mean by current hacks. If you're asking me about current security events, that are out there, here's what's realistically going on and why it's such an issue. We used to have very strong perimeters. Actually, I'll show you what things used to be. And then when you understand where things used to be a few years ago, you'll understand why things got very, very complicated. So, here's what things were, 10 years ago, pre-cloud computing. An organization would have a building, and inside the building, here's what we had. We had routers, servers, switches, storage. And realistically speaking, let's say we had two locations. We would typically have wide area network connections between these two organizations. Realistically, what we did is we'd have maybe say 2 internet connections. Let's just say over here. We would connect with 2 or 3 internet service providers. Let's say this was AT&T, and this one was Verizon. We'd have 2 firewalls, which I'm going to just draw as a single firewall just to make it look real easy now. And any web stuff that we ever had, we placed outside of the firewall in a DMZ. So realistically, the way this was set up was inside of our data centers, we had identity and access management, and you'd want to access a system, you would log in, it would check. Inside of these data centers, we could restrict any kind of access to any kind of traffic because we own the entire network. And anytime you wanted to access something on the internet, the only thing that would ever be reachable outside your internet would say maybe be port 443 TCP for HTTPS in your web DMZ. Now, any internet, no external traffic could ever get into your environment in this environment because you had the firewall. So internal traffic could go out, but no internal traffic could come in. Now, on these links between these data centers, we could make sure that the CEO's traffic would go before somebody else's traffic, or for worm or virus where to get there. We could mitigate it and reduce the impact by traffic shaping, what have you. So these were really secure environments. And here's what I also want you to see. Right over here, right now in this environment, we got a user. Now, this user's Billy Bob, and Billy Bob sets the wrong permissions to something that's inside of here. And guess what? Nothing happens because it's all still inside of the data center. Now, let's look at 2 different changes that are there with cloud computing. First thing to understand is now everything is connected to the internet. So now let's pretend this is cloud. So let's turn this into a cloud. Because there's 2 other things that are going on. First, we've got the storage issue. So the storage is connected to the internet, object storage. So let's call this storage. Now, Billy Bob now sets the permissions of something in storage to public, and now the entire world can see it. Because previously storage was not connected to the internet, and now it is. The other thing that's different here is you really can't create a true demilitarized zone in the cloud. So you can segment into a lot of things, and it gets fairly complicated to actually create to create this kind of security. Because if you think about it, what's different here is, let's say these are web servers, and these are app servers, and these are database servers behind this. Sure, we can put an access list between them, but unless we segment into multiple VPCs and get into complicated things, once the people can get into your web server, they can possibly more likely backdoor into your house. So as these systems became more distributed and more public facing, 3 cloud providers, 10 SaaS providers, these systems became very unruly. And organizations were still, for the most part, trying to solve this with the same firewalls, the same set of access lists. and it takes a much more sophisticated zero trust strategy. And with more threats that are coming out here, especially these AI enabled threats, organizations need very well designed AI enabled security systems, from AI context aware IAM to AI enabled SIEM and source systems to AI enabled firewalls. And that's generally the strategy that's there. So kind of hope that gives you some guidance in about 5 minutes, as quick as I could do that in a short period of time. Hi, Mike. If it's to be radically different than an as is, how do you transform it? That is what we do as architects. And realistically speaking, that starts with going to the key stakeholders and executives first, finding out what they want. That comes from getting the stakeholders support and buy-in, at the executive level. This is not getting the engineers buy-in. This is getting the C-suite, the board, and the business units leaders. This is building a coalition of people and building a cultural change plan and a marketing plan around it. This is looking at the organization's people and determining what kind of people they have, what kind of people they need to hire, what partners they need, what kind of vendors that can actually do it. And this is about building a roadmap, which in many cases for architectures like mine could be 5-10 years in advance. So that's why, it's not like somebody thinks, like people think that they're going to design an architecture and then build it, which obviously is not what architects do. It's not engineering. This is why in an enterprise, it takes me a team of 100 enterprise architects, 12 months, 18 months to even plan it out. And that's how you do it. But if you really want to learn how to do this, join our next webinar. And I'll really walk you through the enterprise architecture process. You can ask me any kind of questions and we'd love to answer them. We have one tomorrow in security architecture. You can ask then, or you can ask at another one. I'll definitely go through that process tomorrow either way. This can be an interesting question. Can I compare enterprise architecture, business architecture, and the role of the chief technology officer? So here's what a business architect is in the true sense. And I've been a pure business architect too. And this is the last one before we go back to the content. We'll take questions after that. So a business architect is a management and strategy consultant. And here's what a business architect focuses on. Looking at that looking at that organization strategically, really focusing on that organization's strategy, that organization's market dynamics, the competitiveness inside of the environment, the key business processes, the key value streams. It's starting to sound a lot like enterprise architecture, isn't it? Because it is. But the enterprise architects, the business architects, we predominantly focus on business strategy in that role. So that's where you're typically fresh out of your MBA program at a McKinsey, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, doing business consulting. Working as a business architect, built my enterprise architecture career. Honestly, it was the biggest thing that could help me. Now, the business architect is focused on all of the elements of business, just like the enterprise architect. And what are the elements of business? People, processes, and technology. So when I look at the business architect, I think 80% people and processes, 10% technology. And then when we look at the enterprise architect, it's a little different. Since that business architect is laser focused on business architecture, the enterprise architect is a transition point between the executive strategists and the C-suite and the technical teams. We're that bridge. So we're focused on elements of the business, just like that business architect, but we get a little more technical in our role. So we are focused on the business architecture, how people do their jobs. We're focused on the application architecture, the technology architecture, and the data architecture. So, if you were to look at our focus on the digital transformation side, even though most of our role is business, as enterprise architects, we're focused on people, processes, and technology, but it's probably 50% technology and 50% people and processes, where a business architect is just more focused on business and less focused on technology. And then there's the chief technology officer, which is also an enterprise architect. And some organizations call enterprise architects chief technology officers. But a chief technology officer is a little more technology oriented than the average, most strategic executive enterprise architect. The enterprise architect is typically a little bit more of a strategist, and the chief technology officer is still a strategist, but they're focused more on the technology side versus the entire business side is often limiting, because when you focus too much on the tech, it limits your visibility inside the business, but it still makes those people very valuable as tech strategists. Great, quick question. And I'm actually really glad you asked that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to the content. We're going to have some videos for a little while. We'll come back. We'll answer questions. We'll do it one more. And then we'll have some fun in the end of this. We'll do a project or something like this, or we'll talk about architecture communication or something. Now we're going to shift our attention on enterprise architecture governance, but governance that enables speed, not governance that's gatekeeping. And when we talk about governance, at least good governance from an enterprise architecture perspective, what we're doing is we're creating guardrails that should help teams do things better, faster, and easier. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So, to be fair, governance has a reputation problem. Most people think that governance is going to be slow, and governance is hundreds of meetings, and governance means fill out this paperwork in triplicate, please, and governance means, well, come back to me when you're done so I can tell you that it's wrong. That is not governance. That's obstruction. That's blocking work. That's architecture theater, and that has nothing to do with good enterprise architecture practice. And if that's what governance feels like in your organization, here's what's going to happen. I can tell you right now. If you make it too hard for people, people will work around it, where they'll fake their compliance, but they're not going to follow it. And that gets you in all kinds of trouble. So I like you to think of governance, if done properly, it's kind of like those guardrails on the highway that kind of keep you from going into the direction of oncoming traffic, but don't get in your way. And they enable you to drive faster and potentially even safer because no one's coming in your lane from another environment because those guardrails are there. And that's what we're really talking about. So we have to define what we're trying to do. So when we're talking about enterprise architecture, here's what we're trying to do in the enterprise architecture governance around it. Accelerate delivery, not block it. And I'm going to give you a model for enterprise architecture governance that you can take back with you to work. And we're going to talk about principles of speed enabling governance. Because if it's not making it better for your teams, probably obstructing them. We're going to talk about certain kind of review lanes that will match risk and make sense. We'll talk about how to do simple intake and sorting, or triage, if you will, of various things. And we'll talk about maybe a lightweight architectural review board that's going to feel more like coaching than a big challenging process. And even an exception process that's going to create learning so we can learn from the exceptions and not be a political nightmare. So I'm curious, for those of you that are out there, drop me in the comment section, chat box, what have you. How many of you have seen governance that shows up in the end? You've done the entire project and all of a sudden governance is there in the end. Right before go live, when it's too hard to change anything, it's like governance. That's late stage taxes, if you will. So let's start with the principles that make governance enable speed instead of kill it. So if you remember nothing else, remember speed governance is designed around flow. And if we can design around flow, we can improve the flow while managing risk. So we want to start early. First principle of good governance is start early. Why? Because if we start early, then we're going to be in the process there. So let's say principle one is start early. And that way we can make sure everything that needs to happen occurs early in the process as opposed to enabling a ton of rework later. So here in this early process, we're going to talk to the teams. We're going to discover, we're going to determine, we're going to find information. Because right now over here, any kind of decision change is cheap. We didn't waste a lot of time or people or effort. So we want to start here, not at the end, because if it starts in the end right before the go live, it becomes the stopping as opposed to the enabling. And we want to think about how we can make this happen. Well, if we want to start early, what could we do? Well, we could have office hours twice a week where people could talk to the enterprise architecture team. We could set up a 15-minute architecture consult slot for discovery team so we can just talk about it early in the process. We can even come up with, say, a pre-review checklist of your architecture must meet these things, what have you. And that way the people show up and they've checked off the checklist and we know the architecture means that before they bring it to us. And that helps them do things quicker. Now, principle 1 was get there early, right? Okay, so let's go to principle 2. And principle 2 is about risk-based governance. Now, what does that really mean when I say risk-based governance? We need to put a lot more scrutiny on things where the risk is high. So this thing is almost no risk. We don't need to examine it with a microscope. There's no benefit for that. But this thing is incredibly high risk. Let's look at it more. So where do we think we've got high risk things? Well, protected personal information or protected health information. Any kind of payments. Any kind of workload that's out there, specifically a regulated workload. And a mission critical system. So let's think we have an emergency call system where you call a certain number like 911 in the EOS and paramedics and police and firefighters show up. Imagine what happens if those systems go down. That's a mission critical system. People can die. So in these environments, we need to look a lot more carefully than if it's something very basic. Hope that makes sense. So we need a lot, and with risk-based governance, we have a lot of scrutiny where it matters. And we use very lightweight governance for low-risk changes or things that are well understood or things that are there that are already following approved reference architectures and standards. So if everything is going to get the same scrutiny, governance is just going to become noise. It's going to be a burden. Some things are high risk. We have to extra look. Some things are so simple. I promise you, most of you don't actually think of every single day how many grams of carbohydrates are in your breakfast. Because it probably doesn't matter for most people. Now, if we've got a diabetic, they're going to be very careful about what carbohydrates they eat and the glycemic index of them and the quantity of them and the proportion of their meal, because then it matters and it's critical. So same thing, normal person doesn't think about it, patient with a medical condition might. So I hope that kind of makes sense. So what's the third principle for good governance? Well, the third principle we're going to talk about is clear responsibilities. So what do we mean by that? Because remember, we want to enable speed. Teams can move very fast when they know who makes the decision, who does the advising, who must approve the decision, and who do they just need to inform. In other words, make it clear in your architecture governance, get rid of the mystery. So I'll give you a couple examples. So the product team might determine which customer experience trade-offs are acceptable. The platform will decide on what paid roads and supported patterns we have. Security might decide control requirements and risk standards, what's acceptable and what's not. And we enterprise architects may be focused on cross-domain coherence and long-term costs and risk guardrails. So we're starting to get through the principles of really good architecture governance, but we've got some more, so let's talk about some more of them. So let's get into the next one. Time box responses with SLAs. So principles for governance must be time box, meaning they're not going to be there when I don't know how long it's going to take. We're going to have some kind of information. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So what we want to do is any kind of governance must be time blocked. So we want to commit to a response. So the SLAs are this, for example. Now, if things are in the fast lane, maybe we can do it the same day or 48 hours. If things are in the standard lane, maybe we can do them in, say, 3 days, for example. Maybe something needs a deep review and it can be done in a long time. But that's that the governance needs to get through it, and we may need a week or two and clear milestones along the way. So if people don't realize how long that governance process is going to take, that's no good either. So we want people to understand. So look, this thing we can do in 2 days. This thing's going to take, because it's a quick, easy one, this one's going to take 3 days or 2 days. And this one's going to take a lot longer. So that way people understand. And that's what we're really trying to do. So let's talk a little bit about enterprise architecture reviews that are going to accelerate delivery. So the fastest way to fix review pain is to introduce new lanes to do it faster. Kind of like a highway, it's congested, add some new lanes, and it's better. Because not every change needs the same kind of a meeting, the same quantity of paperwork, and the same delay. So let's talk about fast lane changes. The fast lane to make a change on the system typically is following an approved reference architecture or an approved standard. And with something like that, the review is going to be fairly short. It's going to be fairly predictable. We can often do it even asynchronously, where someone says us something and we comment on it and approve it potentially. If it's small and it's following all our patterns, sometimes we can almost rubber stamp it with a little bit of feedback. And it's pretty easy to move forward. So the key to remember, the teams here are using a paved road. And the government here should feel like the express lane, because they're using that paved road, that pre-approved architecture pattern, that reference architecture that we talked about. It's following on the standards. So pretty easy to go through it and say yes, hopefully. Now that lane 2, that standard lane, that's a little bit different. The standard lane is for moderately novel work, meaning nothing huge or extreme, but nothing super easy also. So the point here from a government's perspective is to ensure alignment, to spot any kind of risks early, to suggest many different patterns or options, maybe to confirm non-functional requirements, security, reliability, observability. And this should still be fast, because the goal here is to help, not delay, but it's going to take a little more time than basically something that can be fast-tracked through. Now, there are some architectures that are going to have a very deep review. And this deep review is for high risk, high impact, or very novel work that's not something we do on a standard basis. So we're now handling a new hospital's protected health information. We better figure this one out and be sure of it. So we're going to give this some scrutiny. Payment flows of a bank and transferring money back and forth, we've got to get that right. Any kind of thing that's going to become a new enterprise precedent, or anything that's giant and large scale, we've got to really assess these. So when we're doing a deep review, we're going to typically have more experts look at it. It's going to take more time. We're going to be very explicit about the trade-offs, because this is going to change the way we do business in many different ways. And we have to have clear outputs and follow-up. So when we do a deep review, it's not punishment. It's the enterprise doing its due diligence where the stakes are at their highest. So if you think about it, what's a good review look like? Well, we kind of have our inputs, we kind of have our focus, and we kind of have our outputs. And I'll talk about what that realistically means. So generally speaking, when I tend to look at these things, I like to view it in 3 different ways. And I'll show you how I view them in terms of the inputs. So when we think about inputs, what the teams bring, for example, to us in the enterprise architecture world, I'll start with the inputs, or give some examples. So it could be a 1-page summary of the business goals and why. And there could be maybe a high-level architecture diagram. High level, not a solution architecture diagram, a high-level architecture diagram. We might actually have something in this section that says key decisions made and decisions that are still open, the risks that are seen, the obvious risks that are seen, and maybe even a timeline. Now, when we get inputs like that, what are we going to be focusing on? Well, the risks and the trade-offs, alignments to, say, principles, standards, or reference architectures we have, non-functional requirements, maybe operability of the system, logging, monitoring, incident response, security boundaries, and data handling. So that gives us what we typically think of in the inputs. Now, let's look at the outputs. What belongs in the outputs? What teams leave with? After we're going through this, what are we ultimately creating with? Well, we've got a decision here, right? Did we approve it? Did we approve it with comments? Do we want another architecture thing that we have to do? Maybe we put the rationale. Why we approved it or why we didn't. Maybe we put specific follow-ups. But the key here is to make the seam succeed. So reviews are one piece of the equation, but the speed is going to come from the full system, intaking, triaging things, potentially a lightweight architectural review board, and an exception process, because not everything is going to fit. So let's talk a little bit about what we're realistically going to talk about, say, intake. How do we take in things and make it easy? How do we triage things in an easy manner? So intake should be simple. Maybe we create an intake form or a ticket, and it's basically something like, what are you trying to do and why are you trying to do it? What's your rough timeline to be able to do this? What's going to be the impact of this change you want to make or this architecture you want? How does it impact the users? How does it impact revenue? What's the criticality of the change that you desire to make, for example? How sensitive is the data that we're going to be working with? And did you use one of the existing reference architecture patterns to set it up? And why am I talking about making this intake form, this intake of a new architecture for review, so easy? Well, if it's going to take 45 minutes for people to fill out this form, they just won't do it. And ultimately what we have left is we've got obstruction. We don't want that. So we have to be able to triage. Triage is a French word to sort. We have to determine what's most important. We have to sort them. And we also have to, speak with stakeholders fairly quickly. So triage is where governance becomes important or inefficient. So when we triage, we determine, okay, this goes to that fast lane. That standard delivery is fairly easy. Or this is that deep inspection that we need to give it, or a fast standard, that type of thing. Now, when we triage, we can say, look at the risk profile. This is extremely high risk. This is very low risk. Go ahead and do it. We can look at what stakeholders are needed. So in order to make this work, do I need stakeholders from which part of the business? What do I need them from? Security, data, application, which C-suite, whatever those key stakeholders are that are going to need to be there. And again, triage isn't approval. It's just sorting it. It's getting you to the right conversation faster. So if we talk about a lightweight architectural review board, we're realistically speaking, we're having small, regular time-boxed events. And if you run your architectural review board that way and keep it lightweight, good things are going to happen. So what's a lightweight architectural review board? Well, a small number of members. We're not turning in this thing into a massive decision via committee. We're putting a few key stakeholders there that can truly understand the impact of the architecture and its business, the impact of the change, what have you. We typically have a lead enterprise architect there. And we typically have domain reps from the various forms of, say, platform architecture. So the network architects, the security architects, the data architects, the cloud architects, what have you, that are all going to have an area of expertise on their platforms. Now, how often do we run these architectural review boards? Well, maybe we run them once a week for 60 to 90 minutes, but we run them in a time box slot per item. So this item's going to get this much time, this item's going to get this much time. And our focus on a lightweight architectural review board is on decisions. We're there to make a decision. We're there to evaluate the risks. We're there to make sure that this architecture aligns with the business goals and needs and will make a positive business impact. So when I run an architectural review board, I like to make it coaching. More of a conversation, more of a coaching session, not an interrogation. I want people to want to come to me. And I want them to be open and honest so we can evaluate it as opposed to hiding information and finding disasters later. I don't want any surprises. This is a no surprise culture. We'll make it easy. People come to us. We get information. We coach. We improve things along the way. And we want to encourage peer reviews and even office hours. We're here. Come to us. So at the end of the day, the architectural review board should feel to the people that are coming to you, we're there to help them do what they need to do and not come and defend their decisions. Now, here's the reality. You've got a process to do these things. We've got smooth architectural review boards. We've got reference architectures, guardrails. Everything's great. And then we need to make some kind of change that it's an exception to our rule. And that's just part of reality. Not everybody reads the same rule books. Not every application can meet everything we need. So we have to think about exemptions. And here we need to come up with a clear, time-bound approach to manage exceptions. And exceptions is where your governance team is really going to get tested. And you have to have a clear process for things that meet exceptions. And maybe it's a new piece of technology or a kind of technology that's not on your standards list already. Maybe you need to deviate from a reference architecture for a good reason. Maybe you have to take a temporary shortcut for a critical business need or a critical deadline. This is where the exception requests come in. So if we always want to do exception requests, if we deviate from a standard, if there's and we have to understand the why. Why are we deviating? Is it a business driver? Is it a timeline? Is it some constraint we don't have? And what's the risk? Now, if we make this thing and we do this exception, what kind of compensating controls can we use to maybe protect it and de-risk it? Who's the owner? Who accepts responsibility? And those types of things, when's the expiry revisit date that we go back to this? So I want you to think about that exception request and then how will we evaluate it? Well, does the variation from the norm give us net value? Is it helping us as a business? Can it be contained and supported? So if we do this new thing that actually is an exception, can we manage it? Can we support it? And is it create any kind of security or major weaknesses that we can't support? And if this exception succeeds, should we consider it a candidate for a future standard? Something to think about. So what are the outcomes that we're coming up with here? Well, something that's approved ideally, or a review date, or it's not approved with a clear rationale as why, and what could a credible alternative to be. So the key to remember here is that exceptions are not a loophole. They're an input signal. If we see an exception, we need to understand that maybe we need to do something different. Maybe there's a reason for it, not just throw it out immediately. So we want to capture exceptions in, say, an exception registry, in, say, a lessons learned area, and create a backlog of future patterns and paved roads. So let's talk a little bit more about practical governance. Because I want you to use the standard path, make it easy, and make exceptions possible when need to be, make them visible and time-bound. So that's realistically what we're talking about. So we talked about processes, but let's really bring it back to the human side. Because a lot of our job, the art of our job, is the human side. and we have to be credible. And I want you to think what happens, to the parent that's overly restrictive with their child. Their child lies, sneaks around, does things that the parents would never let them do. Well, same thing happens here. If we become the architecture police and it's all about no, 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 and it's too hard to deal with us, guess what? It'll be just like children that are working around their parents' rules. People will work around the governance. So to build credibility, you cannot be the architecture police. You get credible, and it's earned through behaviors, not titles. Titles don't make you credible. The way you act, the way you treat people, what people remember, that makes you credible. So the 3 behaviors I want you to think about is consistency. Apply standards fairly across teams. Don't have your favorites. Be very fair and rational with people. Don't let politics determine which team gets an exception. Be pragmatic or practical. Avoid the perfect architecture. It doesn't exist. Offer phased journeys, stabilize first, refactor next. Be business oriented. Talk outcomes. Revenue, cost, risk, customer experience, not tech, especially with the C-suite. Now, you have to remember in an enterprise architect role, or any architect role for that matter, we have to influence without authority. In many cases, we have a team that works for us that could be 100 people strong that don't work for us. They work for other managers and they dot line report to us. So we're influencing without authority. So in order to do that, in order to influence, in order to make change, you need to know what matters to your customer or the C-suite. So we need to ask our stakeholders, what are they measured on? See, a product owner is typically measured on adoption of their product or revenue from the product or the speed that they deliver products to market. The operations people are typically judged based upon stability of the system or incidents or mean time to repair an incident. The security people are judged by security breaches or findings or audit outcomes. So the key is what we have to do is align our governance to the objectives and still work with our stakeholders and get their support and buy-in. So we have to understand what our stakeholders care about. Now, when we get all this information from the key stakeholders and we've had everybody look at it, we have a lot of good things that occur. Well, we're no longer in the incident world where everybody's on pager duty, for example, because we've thought things through and got the advice of the experts on various components. Audits are better, faster, and cheaper. So whenever possible, we want to bring data. Teams using X pattern had fewer incidents. Services on the paved pipeline deployed 38% faster with less rollbacks, what have you. So if we think about communication habits, how you speak matters. We can do this if we do X, Y, Z instead of no or no because of whatever reasons we can still use. What we must say is to provide a credible alternative whenever possible. Whether it's a physician telling a patient, I can't give you this drug because of X, Y, Z reasons, but I can give you this. Or an enterprise architect saying, well, we can't do that because of this risk, but we can do this. And it'll get all your goals met. Much better way. And I like to publicly celebrate teams that came to us with a good architecture. They shipped it quickly because that builds the relationships and credibility along the way. So at the end of the day, remember, governance that enables speed doesn't feel like policing. It feels like a service that makes team more successful, and people definitely care about being more. All right, well, we are back. Talked a lot about enterprise architecture and goals and things and what we're working on in enterprise architecture. I see one question came in. I want to see if others do, but let me go through a few things while I wait and see if any questions come in. If you're having a good time, maybe give the video a like, maybe subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to be notified of new videos to help in your enterprise architect, cloud architect, security architect, or AI architect career. At the same time tonight, if you just joined us, Praveen, he's an AI architect, and he's going to come and talk about his experience as an architect. He was one of our clients. He's a fantastic architect. He's now a senior vice president, JP Morgan Chase, of architecture. And he's going to talk about what he does as an AI architect and compared to what people think he does and what we all, and you can ask him many, many questions about his career, and he'll be happy to answer. So that's going to be tonight at 6 p.m. if you're catching this live. If not, we will leave a link to that in the description of this video so you can catch it another time after the video is up there. Tomorrow, we're going to have an architecture webinar. Now, tomorrow, we're going to talk about how to become a security architect, but you can ask about any other architecture careers as well. We'll talk about what we do as architects, the skills you need to get hired as an architect, what hiring managers look for when they hire an architect. We'll talk about what belongs in your architect portfolio. We'll talk about what the right credentials are for the various architecture roles, and whatever it takes to get you hired, and it's free. So hope you sign up. Hope to meet you on Zoom. Love meeting new people. Love helping people get hired in architecture careers. And feel free to ask me questions there. So sign up, the links in the chat box and the description. At this point, and let's bring in the questions. And if you've got some, bring it in. And otherwise, if you don't have a question, maybe give me a hashtag enterprise architecture is fun, like I saw Jasser do. I love that. Rock. Sometimes small and medium businesses tend to classify too many needs in the now phase, depending upon urgency. But without enough resources, people, money, etc., to carry on, they shift to later, as in many cases they can. How do you manage? So I'm going to answer this in twofold. The reality is enterprise architects don't work on small and medium-sized businesses. Here's the reason companies pay us $250,000 or more per year as an enterprise architect, and many are paid far more than that. They are connecting us because they have 87 vice presidents. They have 32 business unit heads. They've got 2,000 technology professionals, or 5,000 or 10,000 in the organization. And they're looking for us to tie it all together in a cohesive strategy. So we don't really work for small businesses or medium businesses. We work for enterprise businesses as enterprise architects, because we're architecting the enterprise. Now, having said that, I can still help you here. First, I'm very familiar with operating a small, medium-sized business, but more than that, small and medium-sized businesses and large businesses still have constraints, and they still face trade-offs. Probably the best way I can give you an example is these two. The one constraint that we can never do is we can never get to zero risk. There's no way we can ever get to zero risk. So when we come to an organization, like say, and we're looking at the security architecture and other risk management things, we can't get to zero risk. And here's the reason why. Zero risk means we close the business down. Then there's no risk to the business. As soon as we have one sales rep, as soon as we have one system online, as soon as we do anything, there's immediately some degree of risk. Now, some risks can be mitigated, some risks can't. You know, some risks, like people coming in from the outside trying to breach the perimeter into your website, a lot of that, a good percentage of that can be knocked out by some next generation firewalls. It's not enough to do it all, but a good percentage will be knocked out just by the firewall. And that is a risk we can easily manage. So when it comes to that, when it comes to financial constraints, because we can't do everything, because it's infeasible to do everything, and because it would be a fortune to do everything. For example, if you wanted to truly guarantee or come as close to guarantee the time you leave your house to being able to get to an airport with complete safety, you might need lead cars, follow cars, helicopters following you, armored cars, 3 bodyguards on each side of you, multiple route plans to even think about how you would do it. And, you know, most people can't afford to do that just to get to the airport. So most businesses can't. So what you have to do when it comes to risk is look at the risks, quantify the risks, and then prioritize the risks based on what matters most for the business. And that's the same thing with the way organizations invest in a technology platform. Nobody's going to say, hey, cloud computing is cool, so we need to be cloud first, and want to invest in that for that reason. And that's marketing slogans that sounds cool. But if you can show the person that by migrating to the cloud, you've got more agility and you can deploy new things faster, and that can give you a competitive advantage, then businesses will invest in it. So when it comes to limited resources, what you do is you look at the goals that are most strategic, or the risk that you're most trying to cover up, because they're both basically the same thing. One is gain and one is risk avoidance. You figure out what's most important, and then you figure out what gets you the best return on investment. and then you typically invest in those things, and you deprioritize the other. That's typically how you would do it. Prioritize what's most critical, what has the highest value. And actually, that's exactly why the architects have to create a business case. Because when somebody wants to promote a new application architecture or a new AI architecture or a new security architecture or a new product development, that business has to make the decision, I've got $10 million. I can invest it in this AI architecture thing. I can invest this $10 million in this new product. And the business will look at the opportunity cost of that. They will look at the expected value of what they expect to yield a greater return on investment, and they will fund in that one. That's typically how they would do it. So same way as you would do it in any company, that's how you prioritize it. And great question. Starting from strategy is great, but what if the strategy is not clear? Or if the organization is in firefighting mode? How do you give value in such cases? Your job is to stop the chaos in those cases. Because if you're running in every different direction, you're not going anywhere. And that's, I use the career example where many people get stuck in their career as they try to do this. They think that if they're going to learn a lot of people's jobs, I'll learn a little DevOps, learn a little SysOps, I'll learn a little coding, learn a little cloud engineering, a little network administration, a little help desk stuff. And in the end, what they've stacked is a whole bunch of junior level skills in 20 people's careers, and they don't really have anything for the most part. But let's say we have someone that's focused on becoming an enterprise architect, and they learn business strategy, they develop business acumen, they develop great, strong executive presence, they develop great, strong leadership skill, they understand frameworks, they understand how to apply to the business, they understand strategy. Now that person can actually help them. So when it is pure chaos, we need to control the chaos. Go in, really find the true executives and say, where are you going? What's keeping you from getting there? And then we've got to go speak to the key stakeholders and ask them the same question. And you may get a different answer. So in those cases, we have to figure out who's right. Because depending upon the vantage point, the perspective you're looking at it, it's going to feel different. So that's really where we can add value in there. Stop the chaos, figure out what's going on. And I bet, Andy, what you see as in those situations is you see some of the company's money is funding this. Some of the company's money is funding something that's going to hurt that same initiative at the same time. Somebody's funding this, then it's going to go against another initiative. And when you can stop that chaos and pour all the money and all the people into the exact right strategy, you're going to get there. But sometimes it's going to take 6 months to a year to even understand what you have before you can do it. And that happens. And if that's what you find, just make it clear to the C-suite and the strategy and the board. Look, this is what you actually see. There is a huge opportunity to be able to move faster, to reduce costs, to be more secure. But it's going to take us the time, and we need to invest in investigating it to figure this out for those reasons. Then you'll get the time. Great question. You have often seen which products or technology we're going to adopt is predetermined based upon Gartner reports, and EA is there to justify the architecture to get approved. This is the last question we're going to do right now. Well, here's the reality. I've seen it, but that's not enterprise architecture. And we talked in the previous days about what I called architecture theater, where we have architects that are doing stuff, but none of it contributes to anything. They're just an approval yes or no group. They're writing all kinds of artifacts that aren't tied to anything or any decisions. It's not real architecture. That's spending money. But what happens is those companies, once that occurs, see the architects that aren't doing anything, and then they put them in an ivory tower and they don't listen to anything they have to say, and then they use them as adoption. Now, I've seen it. This occurs when an organization does not have an effective enterprise architecture practice or a practice that's highly respected. And then what happens is everybody that's there on the technology side, they get all excited about technology. They convince somebody to fund this technology, and the technology delivers nothing. And I've seen it again and again and again. And here's usually why that happened. It happened is they hired an enterprise architecture practice. And in that practice, they didn't hire the people with the right skills. They hired people that were very strong technically. They had moved out of solutions architecture roles, but they didn't have the business acumen. They didn't have the executive presence. They didn't have the leadership. And what would happen is they'd walk into a client meeting with the executives, our key stakeholders. They'd start talking about tech. The executive was saying to themselves, what the heck is this person saying to themselves? This person's wasting my time. And then they get them out of the office. And then they call the manager or the VP and say, please don't send this person back to me. And the VP says, that's okay. This person's strong in design and I'm going to make them do design. And then they get completely looped out of it. The fix is going in there with the right business knowledge so that when you meet those executives, you're a peer to them. You have the same business acumen, the same strategy, the same knowledge, as if you read off of the same sheet of music. Then they see you as a peer. And then when you have the same executive presence and your relevance and you're talking in the same language about the same thing, now you're a trusted advisor. And then when you're a trusted advisor, they want to listen to everything you have to say. And then you'll be there that determines what the roadmap is as opposed to kicking it after the fact. Because I agree with you. I've seen it. In fact, a lot of what I've done in my career was rescue architecture practices that had made those mistakes and redesign the architecture teams with the right people. And then after that, these things really smooth themselves out and perform very nicely. Great, great, great question. All right, I've had fun. We've got one more set of videos to go through that I had pre-recorded. Then we'll come back for questions and we'll talk about a few things. I'm going to talk a lot about the business architecture after we come back after this next video and why we have to focus on it before the technology strategy. And I think once you all understand that and that really glues together, it'll separate you from so many of the architects that are actually out there. I think it'll be good for you. So stick around, maybe give a like, subscribe, that kind of thing. And Chris, let's roll with the content. Now we're going to talk about executive storytelling. And that's going to be one of the most critical skills for the enterprise architect, because ultimately we have to be able to sell our architecture to the C-suite, get funding for it, or it will not go anywhere. And I'm going to say that the more senior you go in your architecture career, and whether that's cloud architecture, security architecture, or enterprise architecture, the higher you get, the more your job becomes communicating. In fact, you can almost look at most architecture careers as about 50% thinking and about 50% communicating. And the bigger you get in your career, the higher you go, the more communication becomes important. So why do enterprise architects need to understand executive storytelling, business acumen, what have you? Well, if we can't get our architecture funded, it stops. So if we've got a security architecture weakness and it's going to cost $50 million to fix it, and we can't get funding for it and we get hacked, well, you can see what happens if you can't do executive storytelling. So here's the uncomfortable truth. If you can't tell the story as an enterprise architect, here's what's going to happen. You won't get funding, you won't get support, and you won't get adoption of anything. And that is a very career limiting place to be. Because if your architecture doesn't get adoption, the architecture doesn't matter. It's just a diagram and a lot of hurt feelings. So executive storytelling is an enterprise architecture delivery skill and one of the most critical ones. And executive storytelling is not marketing. It's not fluff. It's a skill that you need to align the way an organization does things. And here's the thing. Executives don't buy tech. Executives don't buy architecture pictures. Executives buy outcomes, and they'll fund outcomes. And an outcome could be we can do things faster or better or more stably or reduce our risk or enhance our revenue, enhance our productivity, enhance the customer experience, something related to the business. So what we're going to talk about in this session is going to be related to stakeholder mapping, a simple story, how you would tell a story, and then how you would handle pushback as an executive architect or an enterprise architect. So let me know in the chat section or the chat box or the comments section for those of you that may be watching it that way. Who's seen a very good technical proposal die in a meeting? Not because the technology was wrong, not because the technology wasn't even great, but because the story didn't land and the executive said, I don't have money for that. We're going to fix that right now. So one of the things that we have to do is map stakeholders. And that's because the same architecture story lands completely differently depending upon who's there, depending upon who sees it. So a hairdresser, for example, may look at the hair on someone's head and say, it doesn't look right, I can fix it. A dermatologist might look at that hair on that person's head and say, oh, there's something wrong with that patient's scalp. I need to prescribe this medication. So depending upon your frame of reference or your vantage point, you're going to see things differently. And we as architects need to do the same thing when we communicate to executives. We need to communicate in their language and whatever they care about. So when you map out your stakeholders, you stop treating all of your stakeholders like a single audience. And this is absolutely critical. So we've got some stakeholders that have influence. And if we're dealing with a stakeholder that has significant influence, they have the ability, typically speaking, to fund your initiative, to say no way to your initiative, or approve it. Now, in order to get that approval, what does that stakeholder care about? Because that's going to be the secret. If I bought my wife a toolbox, she wouldn't say that's the most exciting thing, and she wouldn't love it. If I bought a toolbox for my brother, and my brother is magic with his hands, and he loves tools, building stuff, then he would say, this is the greatest gift ever. My wife would say, dear, you're in the doghouse. Get me something to make me happy to get out of the doghouse, or whatever. You get the concept. So the key is your architecture story has the same core facts, but the way you position those facts has to change per audience. So I'll give you a little bit of a secret, a little bit of insight into what people care about. So I'll show you what certain key stakeholders care about. We'll map them out. So let's say we've got the CEO. What does the CEO care about? Well, growth of the business, revenue, risk, how to stay competitive, competitive advantage, and how does this move the needle? Like, what's this architecture doing for us? And that's what a CEO cares about. And if you're communicating to the CEO, and I've seen it, about packets per second going through a box, you're no longer meeting with that CEO. Now, what about the chief operating officer? They've got similar but different concerns than the CEO. Now, the chief operating officer is concerned about efficiency and operational efficiency. Can we grow? Can we scale? Is it stable? What's the business going to be like? Does it reduce friction? Does it make things better for the business? How about the chief financial officer? What do they care about? Well, they're the guardians of the organization's financial resources. So cost, ROI, financial risk. So you can see they're all similar but slightly different. How about the chief information officer and the chief technology officer? Well, they might be concerned about delivery speed, tech risk, tech talent, and the technology platforms used. Okay, wait. So this gets fairly complicated, and I've only done a few of them. So this person's concerned about where the business is going. This person's concerned about how do we operate the business better. This next person's concerned about financial risk and ROI metrics, and the next person's related to this thing. So I'll give you some more. What about, say, the HR people? Because, HR could be involved too. So what's an HR executive care about? Well, they're typically worried about culture. They're worried about skills. They're worried about employee experience. Can we staff this? Those types of things. So what I want you to see is no matter where we're at, every one of these people has a different perspective, but we must communicate to them in their language of the things they care about. So we're going to build the stakeholder map. And when we build our stakeholder map, there's a couple other things that we generally need to put on there. And I like to identify 3 categories of stakeholders. So I'll show you what they typically are. So these are champions that you want. You want to find champions. Now, the champion is typically someone that wants what you have. And they're people that are typically well respected throughout the organization, and they'll help you get to your goals. Now, these you want to support and get them on your team. Now, in every architecture, you're going to run into these characters too. No matter what, sometimes these people just want to block everything so they can feel important. And they can kill your deal or slow it down. Or maybe they're blocking it for a reason. But what you have to do with this group, generally speaking, is to get them to open up and build some alliances and build some relationships. And then typically speaking on your stakeholders, you're also going to have your must consults. And when we're dealing with the must consult people, realistically speaking, they may not be the sponsor of the product, but you can't proceed without them. So you're going to have to deal with it. But if we look at who we're dealing with, we also have to tailor what we give them. The depth of detail. The CEO doesn't want to know about about the tech stuff. They want to know what it's going to do for the business. The language we put it in. I'm joking right now, but if I had people that were Greek speaking, I'd speak to them in Greek. Posisa simera. How are you today? But that's really the key. Speak in the language. And it could be the actual language, and it also could be the language of physicians speaking a physician language, chief financial officer speaking a CFO language, what that have you. And what you're going to lead with. And I'll give you some examples of tailoring it. So if I'm going to speak to the chief financial officer, I'm going to talk about the investment. I'm going to talk about operational costs. I'm going to talk about, say, a payback period and the ROI. Now, if I'm going to talk to the chief information security officer, I'm going to talk about risk reduction and controls we can put in and evidence that we're not creating any new security exposures. When I speak to the chief technology officer, I'm going to talk about platform implications and delivery capabilities and maintainability. But if I talk to the chief operating officer, we're going to talk about operational stability and measurable improvements in the business and its operations. So let's have a little bit of fun for about 2 minutes. Let's think about this. I want you in your mind to pick an initiative you've seen. Whether it's a data platform or an integration standard or a modernization or identity or observability. And I want you to write this down. Find one champion for the project you're working on right now, if you're working on it. If not, we don't have to worry about it. Find someone that's just a blocker. Map them out. And find that one must consult person you have. Good. That's your audience map. And now that we know who we're talking to, now we know how to structure the story. So let's talk about structuring your story to make it executive ready. So there's a lot of ways you can structure your stories. Some people structure them as problem, impact, options, recommendation, economics, and risk. There are other ways to do that. I'm going to just use that option now, but there's lots of ways we can describe it or frame our arguments. So some people like to frame it starting by what the problem is. The problem is revenues have decreased 10%. Whatever the problem is. Or customer onboarding is slow and error prone. Or our integration landscape is expensive and it's fragmented and it takes too long. We can't reliably meet our uptime expectations, specifically for our highest revenue customers. Now, these are things that needs to be able to be understood by an executive because we're dealing with business problems here, typically speaking, when we deal with executives. So now here's what we're trying to solve. Then we talk about the impact. The impact, if you think about it, is where the architecture is going to be fundable. So quantify the impact in terms that executives care about. Time. How long is it going to take? How long is the onboarding time? What's the cost of this? Is it going to take a lot of manual effort, meaning a lot of staffing? Is that what is the cost of it, and where is the cost going, for example? What's the risk? If we do this, what's the risk? If we don't do this, what's the risk? What's the audit findings show us? What kind of incidents have we had, for example? Or maybe even what's the impact to customer experience? Okay, we have this issue. What's the impact to customer experience? Customer satisfaction, what have you? Because when we know actually what the problem is, and we know the impact of that problem on the business, then we can start thinking about what's important or what's not important. Now there's options. So there's always going to be more than one option. One option is to do absolutely nothing. Now, that might be a good option. It could be a bad option. Another option might be an incremental change, like a small change. And maybe that reduces risks and improves outcomes over the next 1 to 2 years. Maybe another option is to completely re-platform what we have or change platforms. We went to the cloud. It cost 2.5 times more for us than it was in the data center. We had more breaches. Our performance wasn't as good. So we migrate back to the data center. We build a private cloud, what have you. Or either way, that's the point, is what are our options? And when we talk about options, keep them high level. Remember, they're going to executives. This is not the time for a technical deep dive that you would do as engineers. You're there with the C-suite. So your goal is to show you made a real choice, not a pitch deck on what's the impact on the business. And if there's only one option in your set of slides, it's not an architecture. A doctor has more than one pill they can prescribe or more than one option. They try to pick the best after evaluating trade-offs. We architects are the same thing. If there's only one option on the slide, you're delivering a sales pitch. Not a here's option A with this strengths and this weaknesses. Here's option B with this strengths and these weaknesses. Now, generally speaking, it's good to have options, but we're going to pick a recommendation. And we're going to say we recommend this option, for example, as this is going to give us the best balance that we need for the next 18 to 24 months. So we're recommending option A because it gives us the best balance of speed, risk, and cost while building the foundations of what we'll need to use later. That is in business world. And senior leaders know there's nothing perfect. They know that. Senior leadership is looking for clarity, trade-off honesty, and a path that can be supported. Every C-suite person or CXO knows this. Now let's talk about the finance or the economics, depending upon what circles you live in. And finance is not a spreadsheet title. It's an executive narrative. And when you're dealing with the finances, you have to include several things. The investment size, is it $1 million? Is it $1 billion? The phases. What do we spend money on now? What do we spend money on later? Now, what's the operating cost implications on the business? What does it cost to, say, run this workload or license this or support it? And of course, what's the payback story? You invested $1 billion in this, but you got $8 billion back in 2 years. What's the payback period going to be? That's what we're typically doing. So how might you frame this? This is a phased investment. Phase 1 provides the foundations. Phase 2 is where we scale it. We reduced duplicated tooling and manual effort, and this will improve our cost of delivery over time. Because if the CEO can't understand your economic slide or your finance slide in less than 60 seconds, you went way, way, way too deep. Now let's talk about risk. Risk doesn't kill initiatives when we know about it. It's hidden risks that are a problem. Everything is a risk. We get it. But we need to know what the risk is and plan it ahead of time so we know what kind of mitigations we have. So let's talk about some risk categories that exist. Execution risk. The risk of not getting it done because we have, say, lack of capacity, we sequenced it wrong, or we missed a dependency along the way. We have a technology risk. Maybe the technology doesn't work. Maybe the technology is not reliable. Maybe it doesn't integrate well or perform well. We always have the risk of change management risk. And that's related to adoption and training and making sure the organization uses it. We even have vendor risk. If you go to the cloud and use the wrong services, you're locked in. And that's going to make a lot of technical debt, which will make changes later. We could be locked in with a price or other kind of contract constraints. So what we need to do is, if we understand what the risks are, we understand how to de-risk it. All right, we'll de-risk this by trying one business unit first. Or we'll stage the rollout and keep various rollback paths. Or we'll invest in the training and platform supported before we do adoption. So don't just list the risks. Show how you reduce the risk. Just like a doctor. You have a risk of this. You can reduce your risk by taking this medication, stop smoking, exercising. That's what we're talking about. So one thing that you have to do is you got to have the ask. What are you asking for? I'll give you some examples. We need approval to proceed with phase 1 funding. We need an endorsement of the standards so teams can start using it. We need a steering committee decision between options A and options B. And if you don't ask, you don't get it. So you're going to have to ask. So when you present a real story, you may get pushback. But let's talk about handling pushback like an enterprise architect. So we want to almost normalize pushback. Pushback is not personal. It's data. And when you get pushback from a stakeholder, this is great information because it tells you what the stakeholder values and what they're concerned about. So you have a chance to tune in and make it better for the business. So let's talk about common pushbacks. Cost. It's too expensive. Or the risk of change is too risky. Or we don't have room to do this year. Or that's not in our system or our decisions. So how do you deal with that? Well, sometimes you have to reframe it. So when someone gives information to you, the first thing I want you to do is actively listen. Help me understand your concern in more detail. Which part of this worries you the most? The cost, the timeline, or the operational risk, for example. And acknowledge and reframe it too. You are right. This is a big change, for example. But the risk of not changing is significant incidents, audit exposure, or growth exchange. So you also have to show the risk of doing nothing. And then what you typically need to do after you've heard them and you acknowledge there's validity in what they're saying, because there probably is, now we can start aligning to the shared goal. So if we're dealing with the CFO, talk about predictability and revenue run rate. Or for example, if we're dealing with the COO, talk about, say, stability or the cycle time to do things. If we're talking to a chief information security officer, maybe it's audit finding or exposure. And maybe if it's the CEO or the person that's running a business unit, it's growth and competitiveness for that organization or business unit. So I like to offer options. And options could be a phased approach, a smaller pilot, or reduced scope. What if we start with one region of the business, start with one business unit, start with one value stream, and see what happens, test it. If it works, we can roll out to more. And I always want to use data and examples, whether it's information of past incidents, cost trends, delivery bottlenecks, audit finding. Here's what I want you to avoid. If someone gives you pushback, don't get defensive. Don't flood them with technical detail to win, and don't ignore the political environment or the emotional drivers underneath the decision, because they are critical and need to be addressed. Now, half of what we do as enterprise architects, or any architect for that matter, is managing stakeholders and managing conflict between stakeholders. And a lot of times the conflict isn't you, say, versus an executive. It's an executive versus another executive. And you were brought in to do something from executive A, but executive B hates executive A and doesn't want to do it, or what have you, or any of these kind of crazy things could be going on. So your job is to surface the trade-offs explicitly. If we optimize for speed, we accept higher risk, for example. If we optimize for cost, we accept slower delivery. And then we propose criteria. We talk about value or risk or regulatory obligations or strategic importance. And if needed, we propose a decision for them. Let's take this to the steering committee with options and trade-offs clearly laid out. So let's talk about the final deliverable we might be bringing in. I'll call it an enterprise architecture starter kit. Make it real quick to kind of summarize it for you. So here's what I consider is the minimum set of architecture artifacts that's going to make your story credible. A capability map or a domain snapshot. A current versus target state architecture at a very high level. principles and standards, which are going to be your guardrails, for example, potentially 1 or 2 reference architecture sketches, and a 12 to 18 month roadmap, for example, and that now, next, later, and even an architectural decision record, which you can think of as that 1-page memo that explains the logic. Now, this little kit, this mini starter kit, takes an opinion and turns it more into an executable plan. So how would you do a 5-minute executive briefing? Because sometimes that's all you're going to get. Maybe 30 seconds about who you're talking to in context. 1 minute where you discuss the problem and the impact in the language of your stakeholder. Maybe 1.5 minutes on your options and recommendations with trade-offs. Maybe 1 minute on the finance and 30 seconds about your ask and the next steps. And if you can deliver this clearly, you'll stand out very quickly as a senior enterprise architect. All right, we are back. We're done with the primary content for the day. We have a couple of things we can talk about in the short term, but I'm going to answer some questions for a little while. So I hope everybody's been enjoying the content on learning enterprise architecture fundamentals. We talked a lot about architecture and the such so far. So let's see what kind of questions everyone has. Andy, great to hear from you. As an enterprise architecture consultant, how to help getting quick wins if you work with a client in a new business that you're not familiar with and it takes some time to understand the business. So let's realistically think about what is a win. So there are some jobs where at the end of the day, you're expected to have something. Here's your lines of code. Here's the routers that you configured. But what if your job is going to take 6 months to cut through the chaos? Well, the first thing you have to remember is that is your job, the 6 months to getting through the chaos. So what are you doing in this time? And actually, I'm going to spend some time on this question because I think it's a really good question. So if you're an architect and you get to an organization and it's chaos, and the first thing you start doing is starting to meet the key stakeholders, and you start to develop a relationship with the stakeholders, for some technology stakeholders, some various business stakeholders. You build a relationship with them. You start breaking down barriers or walls. You start asking them what they need, where their pain points are, where their challenges are. And you get that information down. Now, 2 things. One is in all these conversations that you had with these key stakeholders, if you were relevant and you were asking the right questions, they left your meeting saying, wow, Andy's smart. He's really on it. He asked the right questions. He's targeted and laser focused. So they're already looking at you saying, wow. And you're building credibility points in people's minds and political capital, which is there. Now, at the same time, maybe it takes you a couple months to organize the chaos. And while you're working on this, you're still updating management. I've gotten to see this side of the business. I'm hearing this. I've learned this side of the business here. We've uncovered several risks. We've uncovered this. We're going to produce a full report soon. So at that time, you're still letting people know you're doing things. You're documenting things that you actually found. You're having conversations with the right people. And in this concept of you doing your fact finding and building your relationships, that's what you need to be able to be effective in your architect role anyway. So that's where you really start. And as you start to really ask the right questions, more doors are going to open. You're going to speak with the executive vice president of sales and ask them about sales and where people are struggling. And then they're going to say, speak to my VP and my directors of sales. Now, when you speak to those executives, they're going to give you more information that you need. And then that director of sales is going to say, go talk to Andy. Andy's really the rock star on the team that everybody goes to when there's challenges. So then there's that other person on the team that you go talk to. Now, when you start hearing things from different levels of sales and they're all struggling to close because of this, you start to see what capabilities are missing. And then you can start asking those salespeople, if we could solve this, what's it worth to you? And then you start getting a business case around, wow, this little thing that's slowing salespeople down is costing this much. and you identify that opportunity, and you identify it with a confidence interval and what you expect to be able to do about it, that's a very valuable thing, because it's going to take you some time to be able to even figure out what you have, and you're going to be given that time. I mean, to put it into context, just to let you know what organizations often expect in an architecture initiative, especially if a client's not great at it, it's not uncommon that they would hire an IBM or a Cisco or an Accenture or a Deloitte and spend 20, 30, $40 million for them to actually figure out a strategy for them. And they know during that time that it's going to be an army of consultants, and they're all going to be asking questions, and they're probably not going to have much to see for the first month, 2 or 3 months, until they start getting into things. Sure, they'll get strategy meetings, sure, they get updates, but it's going to take a lot of time, or at least it used to dive deep into those kind of analyses to get things done. AI will help with us pulling some of the information out of data sources, but it will never ask the questions and obtain the information, which is why we're safe as architects, because all of this relationship thing, talk to person, influence, lead, it's all that. So I wouldn't worry so much about getting anything done that quickly. You're not an engineer. Strategic things take time, they take planning, but you're constantly documenting what you're doing. You're creating documents, you're sharing the documents with the team of finding things. You're even creating documents to get people's feedback, like a straw document, and you're doing that as well. And all of this is seen as big, high value strategic work. So it doesn't have to be something that's created to actually do something that's perceived as high value. Really great question there, Andy. Great one. No other questions. Wow. Either I'm so good at explaining everything, or you're all very shy. I hope I'm that good and you're not very shy, because I want this to be a place where you can ask whatever questions you have. So I want to get back to this business architecture, technology architecture for a few minutes. And the reason why I want to talk about it is a lot of people get confused. There's confusion about business architecture, enterprise architecture, technology architecture. I know we talked about it, but if we really think about it, and I want to make sure everybody understands why business architecture has to come first before we design any transformation. Business architecture answers these questions. What does the business do? Is it a hospital or is it a hedge fund? I promise you they need a different business model. Who are the organization's customers? That's everything. Are they patients? Are they billion-dollar clients in a hedge fund? Business architecture answers the outcomes. What do we have to do? What's the business need to do? Is it making sure that it gets its patients out of the hospital healthier? Or is it creating spaceships that are going to go to Mars? I don't know. So how does the business make money along the way? Did we go from chemicals to a new cancer drug? If so, what were the steps along the way? Or did we go from a steel rod to a ship that's going to sail from Greece to Miami? Is the way the business works the way it needs to work in the future? Does the company need to change direction because the market it's in it can no longer compete effectively? What kind of risks affect the organization? So what products or services need to be augmented by whatever systems and people we have? What does the company need to do to be better, faster, or more scalable, what have you, at the organization level? See, that's business architecture. And that's what that's designed to ask. And the technology architecture asks the more familiar questions. What systems support the business? Okay, we're going to get to that in a second. What applications are needed? What infrastructure is required? What platforms are needed? So why are they different? Because what we need to do, our architectures always need to back to what that customer actually needs. If it's a hospital and its capabilities is running the hospital, then they need applications, they need networking and security that facilitates running a hospital. Here's the difference between strategic planning and going, uh-oh. Does everybody remember the show Gilligan's Island, where there was a bunch of people, they went out for a 3-hour tour and the ship got stuck in a storm and it got shipwrecked on a deserted island? It was a really, really great show. And when the people were on the island, here's whatever they had. They had whatever was in the SS Minnow. So there was this Thurston Howell III and his wife. They were very rich, so they had money and jewelry with them. There was a professor who had some electronic devices with them. There was Marianne. I forget what she had with them, but whatever they had to live on was exactly what they were shipwrecked with. And why was that? Because nobody planned on them getting accidentally stuck on an island called Gilligan's Island, which they could never seem to get off of for many, many years. But anyway, so that's the Gilligan's Island approach. Now, let's assume we knew we were going to be going to Gilligan's Island ahead of time, and we were going to have to spend a couple of years there. Well, we might plan it ahead of time, and we might say, well, we might need to bring some tools with us. Specifically, we might need some fire starting equipment with us. We might need some emergency blankets in case it's going to get cold. We might need to bring some dried protein and food supplies along the way. We might need some ropes in case we're going to do things. We probably should bring some inflatable rafts with us. We should bring a fuel supply with a motor, and that way you could get off the island when you need it. Fishing supplies, anything it would take, maybe archery for you to catch food. And then you wouldn't be stranded on a 3-hour tour, because what you had is you knew where you were going, you planned it accordingly, and then you had a vacation on a tropical paradise as opposed to struggling. And that's realistically why we always have to do the business. And when we don't focus on the business first, it's going to fail. Because when I was younger, I used to love to go walk in the wilderness. I grew up in Pennsylvania. There were mountains around me. There were hills around me. I'd load up my rucksack with, water filtration supplies, emergency tools, fire starters, extra food. I'd have extra water bottles, and I would go hike for 30, 40 miles. Sometimes I'd stay out there and do it the next day. That was what I did in my youth. I loved it, but I knew what to bring. I knew where I was going. I knew whether to pack cold weather gear or not cold weather gear or emergency grain gear, because I planned it. But if you don't plan it, that's what happens. And that's why most companies fail. What's going on right now out there, so many people see AI and everybody's so excited by AI. They've all invested in AI. You know what the scary thing is? 14% of companies have made an effort to align their AI strategy with their business strategy. Everyone in the chat box, tell me what percentage of the people you think are going to be lucky enough to get any real value out of their AI, when only 14% of them align their business strategy with their AI strategy. Love to see those numbers in the chat box. So think about that. When it comes to enterprise architecture, you can't think techie, even though part of our job is techie. Techie thoughts are, and they're not wrong for the people in charge of the tech, this application is old. This database is outdated. This system could be rewritten. But here's something for you to think about. See this microphone over here, the Shure SM7DB? What if I told you that it was invented in 1971? In 1999, they made a slight engineering change to it. In 2001, they added a different kind of filter and a different kind of mount where it mounts on the hardware. And it's the same microphone, effectively, for the most part, since 1973. Now, this is the #1 microphone used in broadcast and radio broadcast and podcast for its audio quality. But it's a 50-year-old design. And it's a 50-year-old design because businesses don't change when technology changes. Because technology changes, they change when the technology changes the way they do business. So, Adrian, I think about 10% of the people businesses are going to get it right based on that. Because if 14% made an effort to align it, not everybody is going to align it perfectly. So maybe 10% of them are successful. And then we're going to see the next wave of AI failures, of all the AI things that were out there that were trying to solve problems that didn't exist, that become all AI architecture failures. So we have to look at it, what capability needs to support. And also, when we're designing an architecture, why do we look at the business? What if this capability used to be strategic to the business? Maybe the business was a manufacturer, and we had a lot of systems to support manufacturing, but now the business no longer manufactures. Are we going to design more systems to support manufacturing? No. We're going to design more systems to optimize the supply chain and the manufacturing partners. So that's really where I want you to think. Always bring it back to the business. Business capabilities always determine it, whether it's onboarding a customer or processing a claim for an insurance company or a hospital, or detecting fraud for a bank, or determining what you should charge for your product, or predict how many products are going to be sold so you know what kind of inventory and manufacturing to make. That's what we're architecting for. Because if we don't understand what the business wants to achieve, if we don't understand what capabilities they need, if we don't understand which capabilities are important, what do we fund? Do we fund the thing that's meaningless to the business, or do we fund the thing that's impactful to the business? We only can spend our money in one place. So that's the way I always want you to think about these things. I always want you to go back to thinking about the business first. Now, when it comes to AI architectures and automation, I want to leave you with this. If you have a broken process and you do something inefficiently or incorrectly, if you make everybody do it incorrectly, you got real problems. If you automate, especially with AI, an incorrect process, you will make the same mistakes again, and again. And it's going to get real expensive really fast. So in any architecture, we optimize before we do technology, because if we optimize something that wouldn't work, well, we just made it worse, and again. So always think about that. Always, before we get to anything, think about who makes decisions, who owns the capabilities, who owns the data, who funds the services, who governs the standards, because that is everything to us. That is how we will deliver and determine where we will go. And when it comes to applications, I mean a little bit about that. Most people don't realize the amount of application rationalization we do as enterprise architects, and I'll explain that to you. If you walk into the average enterprise, especially if they've got poor enterprise architecture practices, and you'll see maybe they have 200 different applications and say 150 application vendors. Now, you'll find 10 applications that they have all do the exact same thing, all with different vendors, all with different costs, all with different security standards, and the information is not in a single place where it could be meaningful to the company. In many cases, with those environments, we can get rid of 9 of those 10 applications, get everybody to use the same application, reduce our costs, reduce our complexity, reduce our technical debt, and actually get meaningful information. So always think about that. That's always why we're always fair, no bias, no vendor preference. Always looking at what are we trying to achieve before we do something. So that's that extra thing that I wanted to impart on you. All keep it executive relevant, all keep it CXO relevant, all keep it in the language the business needs. So I think there's 1 or 2 questions that came in. I'm happy to see if there's any other questions. And then hopefully I get to see a lot of you tonight on our live when we have a discussion with Praveen. But I see a couple questions popped in, so let's answer those questions. And if more pop in, we'll happily answer them. How do you face a blocker stakeholder, and should we try to create trust to convince them to be a champion? Well, the question is why? Why is that person a blocker? And whenever you have a threat that you want to neutralize the threat, turn the threat into a supporter, you have to learn everything that you can actually find. So, is there a good reason this person wants to block the initiative? Because maybe they're right. Maybe they looked at this architecture and they found the gotcha that nobody else saw, and they are right. So the first thing I want to figure out is why they're blocking it. Then if it's not because they're right and it's not because their team needs it, then I want to find the motivations of why they're blocking. Are they blocking it because once this new change occurs, even though they still have a VP title, they have no responsibilities or people working for them? and they know they'll be out of a job. That could occur. Are they blocking something because they hate it or they're scared of it? Seeing people block initiatives because of that as well. Are they blocking it because they just hate you? In which case, you may or may not be able to do that, but hopefully you can use your emotional intelligence and leadership skills and communication skills to try to remediate that thing. But you got to figure out why. Now, all of that's going to be critical, and sometimes there's still going to be blockers. And what do you do there is you first have to understand where you're going to be with that person in the future. And the key is, if you're going to work with someone long term in the future, you may not want to burn a relationship, which is also something you could or couldn't do. And what I mean is, there's two ways you can address this. One is you can discredit a blocker. I don't recommend it. But if you get enough support from enough other people, and enough of the other people make the blocker look like a crazy person, then ultimately they become no longer a threat to you, or they can't block you along the way. But now you created an enemy, which I generally don't like to do. So generally what I try to do is build support, build a coalition, find the true motivations, understand it in their terms, see if what they need is needed. And a lot of times when you actually get these blockers, they're blocking for a reason. They might need something. They might see something that no one does. And in that case, if you get them heard, or at least get them seen by the other decision makers, they will no longer be a blocker anymore. They will at least see that, look, you tried, you saw things, and you were an advocate for them. So there's lots of ways you can do this based upon where you're going to be and the strategy and how challenging. But whenever possible, I try to find the reason why. Because usually there's a reason why, and often, and I'd say in most cases, there's a good reason why. And if you get to the good reason, because a lot of times you'll see something, and this is going to be especially true for an expert. You're going to see something that makes you uncomfortable, but you don't know what it is. You'll see it. You'll feel it. There'll be something that's going to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. You won't know what that thing is until later, until you figure it out. But if somebody sees one of those things and they're experienced and they're capable or smart, I definitely want to know why. Hope that helps. Chris, let's go to the next one. Andy, business drives technology, but tech could drive business as well. Like disruptive technologies, and there are a ton of examples. How do you justify it? Well, actually, that's one of the biggest problems we actually have, Andy, is we've got a technology. It's a disruptive technology. A company adopts it, they adopt it wrong, and then they're out of business. So it always needs to come from the business. I literally predict there will be more AI-related bankruptcies than you can possibly imagine in the next few years. I also predict that we are going to see AI super companies. They're going to be coming out of here that'll be 10 and $20 trillion companies as well. And people that'll really capitalize off of AI. So the key is when. And I'll give you an example. We saw this in the internet boom. Initially, everybody tried to turn into a .com business as soon as they thought it was cool. And most of them went bankrupt. It was the bad technology layoffs of around 2000, 2001. It was like an entire industry got laid off in a few months. It was horrible to go through. There was another one in 2011. It periodically happens in time, around 2008, that area. But this was horrible. And the reason it was horrible is everybody tried to put everything on the internet, and none of it worked for anything, and because it wasn't going to support the business, and they all ended up. And then throughout most of my life, Andy, I've been called to customers that spent a lot of money and had real issues from the money they wasted and got nothing for it. So I was brought in to fix it. Now that is not something I want to justify. Now let's look at when you do it right. There are many companies out here that have been smart. I will say AI is probably the second most disruptive technology since the internet. Hugely, hugely disruptive in a lot of ways. Use AI wrong, it's not going to help anything. It's going to bankrupt these businesses. use AI right, it's going to be there. So a business shouldn't just invest in AI. They should invest strategically in AI. If you're funding AI capabilities that are not what your business is going to benefit from, just another set that's there. So whenever there's a disruptive technology, a new technology, which we enterprise architects are always focused on, we're looking at the technology. I only started with AI in 2001. David Lithicum, who teaches our AI courses, started with AI in the mid 1980s. He and I have watched AI change over the years, and every architecture we've thought of, for the most part, we've always thought whether AI would be used for forecasting, to process stock trades, or whatever we've done. And as it got better, we just realized that there's more capabilities and we're using it in more places now. But there were plenty of organizations for the last 20 years that survived without a lot of AI. And then there's other companies and major banks that have used more AI than you can think of for the last 2 decades, and they've thrived on it as well. Here's the difference. I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago where JP Morgan Chase announced that they had 2,000 AI professionals working there. 2,000. This was years ago, before people were even thinking about AI. But just think about that. They had the ability to invest and pay a great, tip-top workforce of AI people. And that's just their AI people. That was a few thousand of them. So they could justify it. But at the same time, the average person didn't really know much about AI. They had no idea all this stuff was going on, that systems were trading stocks algorithmically for the last almost 26, 27 years. They didn't know. But it was happening, and all of it was there. But now it's only reached mainstream, and now mainstream is trying to run things that I don't think they're ready for. So to me, it's anything else. Always look at what you're doing. Look at the tools for a job. Surgeon plans the surgery, then determines the surgical tools they will use in the surgery. You don't just stock an operating room full of tools, which are the wrong tools for a surgery. You're going to fly a plane. You're going to determine how far you need to go, what kind of carrier, what kind of things you need to carry before you just pick up the plane. And that's the way I always feel about it. Sure, many people will go straight into a disruptive technology. But the question, is that any better? It's always better to know what the results are going to be of what you actually give before you do it. Unless a company has lots of risk capital and can just afford to lose tens of billions of dollars, always start with a business case. Great questions, Andy. Are there any other questions for me? All right. Well, thank you all for attending today. I hope you had a really good time in these last 4 weeks of this free Enterprise Architecture Fundamentals Bootcamp, where we talked about what we do as enterprise architects and gave you some insight on how to become an architect. If you want to come further and dive deep into your architecture career, we've got a full 1,000-hour enterprise architecture program that you can see on our GoCloud Careers website. That is everything you need to get your first architect job. We are going to have another episode tonight. It's 6 p.m. My good friend Praveen, he's a VP of architecture at JP Morgan Chase. He's an AI architect. He's going to be there to talk about what he does, to talk about what his days are like, the skills that he has, and what his experience has been like in an AI architect at one of the world's largest banks. And he's been the bleeding edge of AI and technology for a long time now. One of our students, and we're very proud of him. He's gone so far. So feel free to ask him any kind of questions tonight, or me, any kind of architect career questions. And we hope to see you there. And I hope to see so many of you in our webinars, either on the Monday evening webinar that we have, or on our Thursday webinars on how to become an architect, where we talk about what we do, the skills you need, the steps to get your first architect job, how you stand out, what hiring managers want, what belongs in your architect portfolio. And you can ask me any questions live and free on Zoom. It's in the chat box and the description of this video. Hope you give this video a like, maybe subscribe, come back to the video later, and share with some friends. Thank you all so much. Take care, everyone. Give me a hashtag Enterprise Architect.